I've chosen the theme of the history of Iranian life during the transition period from the Sasanian to the post-Sasanian, 7th to the 8th century, as part of the Islamic thought courses. And in terms of historiography, many of you may know better that two themes or fields of historiographical studies, what the Germans call Geschichte, everyday lives, and also a theme that, again, both of them really began in the 1980s, became popular in history of private lives, took shape mainly, of course, for the Mediterranean world and, of course, Germany. Paul Bien, a famous ancient historian who helped visit this history of private lives, as he mentions, between the 3rd and the 7th century, something that I know a little bit on the Iranian plateau about, so that through transformations, changes, rhythm of life, moral sensibilities, and the question, of course, is how to capture that with the Iranian. I say this because, of course, the nature of our sources for this period, which has been from above, and it's been mainly based on Futu literature and early Arabic and then Persian histories of the really the 2nd, 3rd century literature, and not earlier. And hence, if we did look at such, Abdul presents really the best example, something that has somewhat codified in the memory of the Iranians of any field, trying to understand what happened during the conquest, and so on, and how to build that is ideas in English as well. As I mentioned, this is the two literature, Balani, Masudi, Daryaee, and Isfahani. Now, I should say that, of course, in the recent decades, our questions about what happened or how things came to be have been rewritten. I just point to Andrew Magnuson's book on Zoroastrian and Islamic history, or Levi Rubin's really interesting book on how the Muslims and the Arabs took on actually Iranian ideas of social stratification, and also religious meaning that was presented as such. So really interesting work took place in terms of theoretically and methodologically to try to find out what happened. This sucker that you see, someone on a horse, is or was standing at the beginning of the gallery of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art for the Islamic section. So as you enter in the Islamic section, you saw it. And then really a vibrant discussion took place as to what makes it Islamic. Is it Islamic? Is it Sasanian? Is it Iranian? How do you define something like this that is from the probably 8th century around there? A near age of that time, where we find both Australians, pottery to both Palette and America. How do we place this period in our imagination? And I'll get back to this stuff. Well, about close to 20 years ago, I remember Nazar Gizzi wrote to me that Touraj, I would like you to come to Bangkok for your birthday, as there was some number of finds. Some 260 letters were found, which according to the Bangkok carbon dating, dated between 666 and 888. This 2 centuries of coincidence that is very much discussed. And they were on leather and parchments, and through a kindness I can give a talk a little bit later about that where we find now in the archives that these are Bab-Abad or an archive, or Gunabad as a depository of bone. So we have this is the first archive, which Nima Asafi has placed it in a cave place called Hastijan. The Hastijan cave, but I call it for us the Qom archive, because this is in the Qom. And then about a decade ago, a little bit more, 33 legal economic documents with bullets with their seals attached to it were also found, which for the letters of Ani suggests to be estimated somewhere close to Saudi in the south of the region. And here on the Boleh says Gion, which I tend to read it as Gion. I think this is the Gion archive, which has been worked with really nicely by Peter Weber, Maria Mansour, again by Touraj under the editorialship of Eliz in restorative times. And here are some photos I took of my Touraj strips to David John in the home area. There's Dr. Afshar, which we went to see all the chart in the region. And it's interesting in a number of chart supposed fire altars in the home area. One in the prison that we didn't get to, but there are still remains of many of them. This is Nibak, which is really close to where the archive was found, and this is David John. So this is the region that we're talking about. And I'm just going to give you a couple of samples to give you a sense of what we can now read and try to now understand the everyday life of people and in a sense forgotten voices that we never had. So here for the first one, I'm just giving you a transcription that is not important, but this translation. So this is from home area, right? To my right, they make happy, beloved sister, nobody. So it's nobody's from that letter. Every happiness. In this bottle of your own, poured in God, an equal share oil on bottle. Sorry about the translation. An oil, a bottle of oil. To your Lord you should send about your health and ease, and that fattens up to me. So tell me, how are you doing? Please, meanwhile, you should write, and we do our study and my doing so. I will stop for that piece. So we're getting really a type of a writing that is private and it's everything that we never had before. I give you the Tabaristan archive example, which is longer in terms of the letters. Here we have an episode that maybe I should read all of this, so that and a certain number of men were gone in the village of Estres, into the house of a woman who's the wife of someone by the name of Lisa. She's a Padashar wife. It is a class of Zoroastrian marriage, that we talk of Zoroastrian marriage, of boys and girls, and her personal belongings have been stolen by these people. And now there should be a case, and they're putting up a case against these men who have rushed into this house. It's interesting that according to Zoroastrian law, she cannot make the official complaint. It has to be her husband. So really interesting details that we begin to see the letters dated to 755. It's year 104, and this year is important. Day of Batman. So they're using Zoroastrian 18, and this is the Apostles' Station of Revolution. Okay, already. Another Tabaristan archive, again, regarding another woman who is being kept from, as a wife, what she should have, her matrimony and so on. So she's now making a complaint about her husband. And the local letter is saying, you have to, do investigation, and if he hasn't paid, he has to be punished. So really, I think, interesting material is coming. This is the rest of it in 755 CE, another letter in this regard. Going back to home, the earliest evidence, we always talk about where's the first mosque in Iran, and it's an issue of, we don't find anything in the first century, but we do find this strip where in Middle Persian, dated post 715 CE, in the name of God, Yaz. In Zoroastrian Middle Persian text, it's usually Yazdan, plural of the gods, right? So we know here something has changed. All municipalities in the name of God, singular. And there's a surveillance or some sort of concept of the masjid, of the mosques around, for those somewhere. So we are at the cusp of seeing Muslims being present on the Iranian plateau. And at the same time, on the same archive, we have receipts of Mr. Magdoy, the wine grower. So wine is being grown, and there are vintners producing wine, and the mosques are there, sort of doing reconnaissance and so on. A very interesting, on the ground information that, of course, this is the purview of philologists, and indeed, it should be until they're deciphered. This is the second generation of decipherment. And then it's the work of historians to try to say, okay, so we have these documents. What can we tell about the social economic history of people? For let's have a party and let's have vinegar, tahina, which is choice probably, cumin, wheat, and so on, and we should give them some, we should have some. So again, a relation between the Arabs and the Iranians on the plateau is being discussed. Again, one more, there's a sacrifice for the god Dominic in year 690 probably. And they said, we want to choose the local Amir, who was a Muslim, and we'll do the other one for the god Mir. But at the same time, there are piglets running around because the Iranians are making biryani probably out of it, as we hear first. And we hear all sorts of interesting details. In this document, which I supplied to Peter Weber from Tehran, we find that there are historian Christians, Surigan, around home. They have their own places. The Tazigan are already present, and these are probably, as I said, just the Ashari Arabs from Yemen who moved there, and the local Raz, the priests who are signing off on some of these claims. So everybody is doing their own thing. So my general observation in this 20 minutes, and I can agree, so I'd like to go quickly, is we get to get in the micro-history of an Iranian village or settlements, something that we did because of the sources that we have, relations, connections, persopography of 7th and 8th century, dietary and economic history. We hear about the daily rations. We can now almost see what the daily rations of an Iranian in the 7th and 8th century was, as well as legal history of marriage laws, contracts. Yes, so really fascinating. As I said, in microhistory, we find in letters that these people, keeper of archives and elder, scribe, king of very much that. And several people are mentioned. So we could actually hear what was going on in this little village, or maybe even bigger, on 755, which is 20th of May. As the letter says, year 114, they have that. Two other letters that really are interesting to me is about a tailor, a Ghazi, who for no rules is instructed to make a shoe, Mosaica, 2 pants, shalwar, and pirahan handbag, the cotton shirt. So there are many cotton shirts, but we also find like this of medicine and all sorts of things for caretaking and so on. So it's that type of information that we suddenly are presented with, at least for 2 locations. In terms of at the end of this, what does this year mean, year 104 and so on? So the Yazdian date that these texts are using match the coins. They're not from the coming of Yazdir to the throne. This is the throne years, but rather his death. So already in the mind of the Iranians, a new era has begun. They're not using Hijra, but what they're using is a post-Yazdir year. So in their mind, they already have a notion of this is a post-Sasanian world. And that's why, as Judith Lerner has emphasized, I will emphasize that the first 100 years is really post-Sasanian period. You could use early Islamic, but for the people living on the plateau, it was a post-Sasanian. It was just called post-Yazdian. And this is apparent on the coin. And so this block that I showed you, this stuff, to me is a post-Sasanian, rather chemical, Islamic, or Sasanian. And to end, I think things change from the documents and the coinage. And these are back-chain documents that were also found during the war in Afghanistan about 30 years ago. Those are interesting in themselves that end in the 8th century at the same time. So we have Bad, and we have Qom, and we have Pakistan, that really by 780s, by the end of the 8th century, Iran is changing in that. For example, I will use the date of Muhammadi, the old faith, the raised by Muhammadi by the Abbasids, where they now begin to use the Hijri coin, Hijri dating on their coin, but also call the place not Ray anymore, but Muhammadi. It coincides with almost all of these documents. That's when I think a new phase of Iranian history is taking place. So I wanted to just touch upon this 100 years of Iranian history. Thank you.
international relations, and I would say more notably on politics.
After this excellent scholarly paper, I don't know what to say. But first, let me thank el Museo Nacional de las Culturas del Mundo and AIS for hosting and for inviting me to be on a panel that when I first heard that I am invited to, I thought that it must be a mistake. And I hope that by the end you do not think that I was right. Anyways, as soon as I looked at the topic, one thing the word that jumped at me was the word loss. And many years ago, I watched a movie by the great Mexican director, Alejandro González called Amores Perros. I think many of you have seen that movie. And at the end of the movie, as you know, when the movie fades out, there is a dedication with white text on black, and I think that's significant, in which it says, I'm going to read it in Spanish, because I try to memorize it to see if I can manage it. Anunciado, porque también somos lo que hemos perdido. To Luciano, because we are also what we have lost. And I immediately after I watched the movie, that word lost. I don't know much about Mexico and who Luciano was. I did some Google search, but not enough to really say anything about that, except that I felt that that dedication resonated with me because I believe, and I speak perhaps only for myself, we Iranians also live in the ruins of a lost future. And when I reflected on the topic, I was not really sure what I am going to say, but I thought that for an archivist, the economy of the world is ecumenical. They don't care. All voices have to be recovered. But if you're like me, consider yourself a political activist before you consider yourself as a scholar, and your scholarship is the service of political activism. But not all voices, the voices are really in place of contest for suppression and it's a fight. It's that whose voice gets to be heard is not a scholarly matter. It's really a matter of fight and struggle. Because of that, and at the same time, I thought that what I would say that is not like one of the papers I have been in those panels that make up the bulk of a conference like this one, as a member of this association as well. And I thought that what should I say that would not be, would be different and would be open to a wider audience, and also relate to what is happening today in Iran, and what is it that people like me are confronting at this very moment. And so, and then it was that earlier I was planning to talk about the relationship between our study and Sanasarian. Some of you may know that I, with the collaboration of Dr. Sanasarian, finally published the critical edition of the Sanasarian, very important in Iran, because it's one of the king, and then we can understand how it's much better in terms of what is the dialogue between the king and the court. Anyway, but I decided to switch to Isaiah. And of course, we cannot say Isaiah is totally forgotten. But it certainly suppresses most of his book. It's not yet, I guess, official permission to be published in Iran. And as a way of bringing this situation to view, I will start by quoting a few sentences from a speech by the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Adelkhah, delivered in 1998 to a group of students at Tehran University. The speech was on the topic of intellectuals, radical intellectualism, non-Champagny. And the quote, our intellectualism was born sick, unhealthy, and deformed, because those who formed the first generation of our intellectual history were sick people. For the moment, I named three. Mirza Matam Khan, the Armenian, they emphasize that every time they mention his name, Mirza Fatali Akhundzadeh, and Haysayya Mahamati. Now what made them sick? That's the answer I told them. Targeting religion, people's beliefs, and authentic native traditions. In other words, they were sickened by modernity, which translates in the theological, political arena as not putting themselves exclusively at the service of the institution of religion as the presumed haven of tradition and memory. Now, this speech was among the most memorable speeches of the Supreme Leader. Let us fast forward to the ceremony to promote Sadat Hossein Salami, the head of the IRGC, to the rank of general after a month after the bloody suppression of the October 98, November 2019 uprising. On that day, Sadat Salami gave a speech that so delighted the watchdog, the Supreme Leader, that he asked that it be published in thousands of copies. In that speech, the general placed the blame for the uprising of Kir after Daesh, Intikhabat Daesh, and Aban Daesh squarely at the door of the inferior and reactionary copies of the likes of Mirza Matam Khan, Mirza Fatali Akhundzadeh, Haysayya. They went on to explain the enablers of these riots. Now, recently, a book of mine titled Haysayya by Kashf Azadi, جستارهای در تماشاشی سوژه مدرن در ایران Haysayya and the Discovery of Freedom, Essays on the Genealogy of the Modern Subject in Iran, came out in Tehran. I wrote that book in part in response to these speeches. I quoted from both the Ayatollah and the General without attribution, and devoted a good part of one of the chapters to Haysayya's views on the institution of religion. Sadly, a substantial part of that section, amounting to several pages, had to be excised by the order of the Bureau of Censorship. I'm going to share the gist of it, lest my noise disappears in the ghostly realm of forgotten voices. But before that, a few words for those of you who don't know what Haysayya is. Haysayya was born in 1836. He was the first Iranian to officially become a U.S. citizen in 1875. After his application, he was expedited by President Ulysses S. Grant, the hero of the Civil War, who invited him to the White House. At the time, Haysayya had traveled the world for some 16 years and had read quite a roster of big names of the time. As it is relevant to our talk, let me also say that he was trained to become a mullah and attended the seminaries in Isfahan and Najaf and remained a believer throughout his life. The part that had to be excised was about my attempt at gathering Haysayya's observations into a framework that I had picked up from Spinoza. I say a framework and not a theory because I'm not using it to explain Haysayya, but simply to lend my talk a shaded background. In Spinoza's views, whose theological political treatise I have translated into Persian, the so-called world of Abrahamic religions, where God has given its first constitution to Moses on Mount Sinai, modern subjects in their attempt to erect a collective order have to deal not with a single mode called the political, but rather with the theological political complex. In other words, they must solve a system of equations with two variables, the political and the theological, such that any value for one determines the value for the other. Spinoza treats religion not so much as an ideology, but as a kind of power, along with the political. Once we see religion as a kind of power, then Haysayya's observations emerge as having the shape of a vicious triangle. I know the triangle was not circle, but it's a vicious triangle nonetheless, which I call Musalase Taqwi or Musalase, the triangle of degeneracy. The most succinct expression of the triangle of degeneracy is perhaps found in the following. This is a quote from Haysayya. Of all places that I have seen, this was at the end of the 19th century, of all places that I have seen, Iran is the worst, since nowhere is in such a state of demise and destitution. This is because in the whole world, oppression by the rulers is not so intense, and the influence of ignorance by the ferocity. In protecting oneself against these two forces, everyone is driven to hypocrisy and lies, and that in turn leads to moral degeneration. The triangle of degeneracy is easy to see. We are talking about the condition of political demise, social disarray, and moral turpitude prevailing among three interacting agent positions: the state, the religious super institution, and the people. The masses of the Iranian people are subject to two kinds of power: one that works on them brutally from the outside, and one that acts both on them and through them from the inside. This is AIS sociological analysis. He does not hypothesize this degeneracy into a timeless Iranian cultural essence or a history. There is no going back to the usual suspects, like the Wajmani, Mongol wars, or the Arab invasion. The subjectivizing relation is not between a people and a history, but among three interacting agent positions. Sayed distinguishes between power and agency. He neither reduces agency to power nor power to its outward naked state form. On his way back from India to Iran, the ship makes a 3-hour-long port call at Karachi. As usual, Sayed is not one to miss the opportunity to see a nearby site. It is a square pound filled with clear water. 17 crocodiles, he counts. 17 crocodiles are lounging in the water with their eyes shut. Several pilgrims arrive. With them, they have smaller lamps. They proceed to sanctify the lamps with incantations and by putting mascara around their eyes. They next tie each lamp's legs and throw them into the pond. Crocodiles called me, parted their eyelids, opened their mouths, tore the lamps apart, and swallowed them. This is a parable. He explains it in a rare metatextual reflection. It's a strange world. It seems like it is an ordinance of creation that ordinarily working folk should toil and suffer, and a group of fortunate ones should enjoy the fruits of their labor. Many are under the thumbs of oppressors who forcibly take away what they earn. If some of them are spared this condition, they themselves deprive themselves of their earnings and put it on the plate of the fortunate ones because of their belief in superstitions. Even when they do not find someone from the human species, they prostrate themselves in front of crocodiles, cows, trees, or stones and ask for their wishes to be granted. Let us briefly talk about this case in this aging position. The official in Iran, the official domain engages in oppression and exploitation for three sets of interrelated reasons. First, the rulers, because of the specific features of the reproduction of political power in Iran, are essentially a bunch of unqualified men who are consequently led to a pretense of power instead of the exercise of actual authority. Their power requires to be conspicuous to be felt. For this reason, they have to demonstrate it by extravagant brutality and pomposity to each other and to the partners. Second, precisely because of this yet emptiness of power, the extended reproduction of the structure of state power in Iran proceeds with a tremendous degree of insecurity. This leads to an unregulated and ruthless kind of a game in which conspiracy, bribery, office buying, disloyalty, and backstabbing prevail. The work of life is hard in Iran, and one has to live constantly in fear. Intimates Amin Sultan, the powerful chancellor of Nasser-Shah to Al-Sarian. Third, the Iranian elite, from the king down to the lowest state functionary, know better ways to running things than they practice. This too is a structural effect. This system is bound to a particular order of knowledge and know. Now, exactly because of its neurology, the withdrawal of any one part at any level from exercising force does not reduce the total amount of oppression. On the contrary, Sayar repeatedly shows that it increases it, for it opens it yet another space, for other players who now have to stage their show of power and they have to gain about, you have to show it. Here's another factor that makes things even worse. When a ruler decides to relax his grip on power, as a system at its highest level is a theological political system, any reduction in the power of an office holder inevitably has repercussions for the boundaries between the theological and the political domains of power. Sayyad spends about 3 weeks in Shiraz. In a conversation he has with Farman, the Governor General proudly explains to him that he has established peace and security in his realm by in his own words, chopping heads and gashing arms. Reflecting on this, Sayyad says, in Iran, if the ruler or king is weak, he would not be able to commit oppression. And then from among the mullahs and the generals and the more powerful others, 1,000 oppressors rise up. On the other hand, if the ruler is powerful, he would be the sole oppressor, and perhaps it could be said that a single oppressor is better than many oppressors. Although sharing in the quality of oppressiveness, the mullah's power and the power of the state are different in some respects. Sayyad avails himself of the metaphor of hunting. In speaking of both, but they differ in that the state rulers are hunters of the human body, while the mullahs are the hunters of his soul, and as they lure the souls of the ordinary and powerless people into their traps, they are far more efficient, perjuring, and harder to stay. Sayyad also observes that the brute power of a state is not always superior to the power of men who have the unpaid army of the religious followers behind them. In the pious city of Yazd, the mullah, having produced a bogus marriage document with the daughter of Sayyad's host, is asking her father for money to annul the contract. Unwilling to put up with the extortion, the father pleads with the city's governor. You have no choice but to pay him, advises the governor. Quote, our life, the governor says, our life and death are in their hands. They forge a document for one, they stick their nose into every affair, declare one a believer and the other an infidel. Could I now say that this mullah is lying? If they were to consult with each other and accuse me of injustice or declare me a Babi or claim that I took a bribe and raise the banner, lo Yazdan, what am I to do? Are we not forced to practice dissimulation, tabiyah, with them, criticize them, and you are told you are offending the Moshe, denounce them, and you are treated as if you have denounced God and the Prophet. But the people are not passive victims. They participate in perpetuating the condition of degeneracy. No matter how awful a situation, people try to find ways to navigate it, to protect themselves and pursue their interests, and in doing so they function to perpetuate it. Not only have they lost their wealth, their industries, and their commerce, but they also have lost their dignity, izzat, and their honor. They have become morally corrupt, hedonistic, lazy, freeloading, and thieves and lose. We need an entire presentation to discuss Sayyad's anthropology of this character company. Sayyad specifically emphasizes the word Eliz. The inhabitants of Iran, he judges, do not want to earn a living by the hardship of work, industry, and business. As a result, they listen to anyone who tells them that if you recite this prayer or hold such a religious ceremony or give some bribe to an overlord or money to an alchemist, you will achieve your goal. Note that Sayyad considers bribing the powerful, engaging in magic, and beseeching a saint to be functionally equivalent. Moral turpitude belongs to the same complex. They all consider flattery, hypocrisy, lying, dishonesty to be necessary. They praise or alternatively besmirch one another without meaning anyone. They are all suspicious of each other, and none speaks frankly to another. People are so habituated to these that we could say they have slipped into their nation. We perhaps need Foucault to go over this with us, but as he's dead, let me come. Sayyad returns to Iran after nearly 18 years of search to find out what it means to be a human in the modern world. He says that himself. He returns home as a modern subject. As such, he sees a chasm between a world he needs in order to be an at-home subject and a world steeped in habits and norms that are hard to even meet for the modern subject. From within his new subjectivity, he sees this world as a triangle of degeneracy. The befitting
I want to share with you some of my experiences in the aftermath of the publication of my books and use them to address some possible hurdles, pitfalls, and emergent issues. A colleague of mine with a background in anthropology, a political scientist, told me many years ago, whatever we write has a personal dimension to it. I rolled my eyes and I thought, well, of course, your background in anthropology would say that. But as years have gone by, I've come to agree with her. My first work on the women's rights movement in Iran had a personal dimension, but I wasn't aware of it when I wrote it. It was dedicated to Fatima, not the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, but the person I dedicated the book to had characteristics attributed in literature to the Prophet's daughter: enduring suffering, generosity, and compassion. The Fatima I dedicated my book to was a Lori, a Sufi, couldn't read or write, but had an amazing memory of poetry, and she would recite poetry. She moved to our house before I was born, and she became a mother to my mother, and a mother, grandmother, friend, guide, and everything else to me. In my wallet today, there is a picture of only one family member, and it's her picture. When I turned 9, she put me on her lap and she said, "You're lucky to have parents that are not going to force you to marry." I was married to a 30-year-old man when I turned 9. And she shared with me 2 memories that she had from her wedding night. The first one was that she was sitting on these high chairs that they put the bride and groom on. And she was surrounded by adults. They were talking all the time. She didn't understand what they were saying, and she was very bored, and she thought she should have brought her doll to play with. The second memory was that she looked down and noticed that everybody's feet touched the floor except hers. And she tried very hard to reach and touch the floor, and she couldn't. And she felt very embarrassed. These were the 2 main memories of her wedding night. Okay. I realized only later to what an extent my subconscious was influenced by her and her love. You should know that I didn't plan to go into academia. This will surprise many people. I was kind of pushed into it. I prepared to work at the United Nations. As a graduate student, I did an internship at the United Nations Children's Fund for the highest-ranking woman at the time at the UN. And I knew everybody in New York headquarters. And that was my goal, so I geared everything I did in academia for that. When I got my PhD, I had several job offers, but they were from departments that I didn't want to be in. And the UN system at the time was famous for discriminating against women. So you could have had a PhD and you would have been working for a man without a high school degree. And so I didn't want to put myself in that situation. So I was kind of pushed into academia because the UN didn't work for me. So I entered it with naivete and disconnect from academic world. I hadn't played the game right. I didn't even know there was a game to be played. So when my book was published, I had a lot of negative experiences. A quarter of a century after the publication of the book, Mushina Khorasani, whom I didn't know and still don't know, translated the book to Persian, and he won the Best Book Prize in Iran. And that was the biggest award anybody could give me in academia. I want to share with you 2 funny experiences from the aftermath of the publication of the first book. The first one was trying to describe her first experience in the Business Studies Association, said it reminded her of the fruit markets of Cairo. And that's exactly the feeling I had when I got in. I'll tell you one experience there. So I entered the elevator, and the elevator door opens, and a Iranian guy walks in. And of course, we all have these tags. Stares at my tag and says, you are Sanasarian. I just read your book and gave it a very negative review. I tore it up. So my response is, what was wrong with it? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. You have to find out first. And then he rants a bit, and then the elevator door opens and he walks out. And I said, but where did you publish it? And he said, I'm not going to tell you that. And the elevator door closes and he walks out. But you know, the only thing I really remember is he was spitting on me as he was talking. He was constantly spitting on me. So decades go by, decades. And I'm in another conference. All of a sudden, the guy appears in front of me and says, so you are still around? I guess. Says, and doing the same thing in the same place. I said, yes, I guess. Starts ranting again, and he's spitting. And all I'm thinking about is this the spitting guy in the elevator, and I should get his name, but he's not giving me a chance. He spit, he talked, he spit, and he disappeared. So if he's here, it's COVID time, don't come near me. You're right. You were always right. I'm wrong. Don't spit. The worst experience on a more serious side was the wrath of female academics after the publication of the women's rights movement in Iran. They surprised me. They set up their own grouping. All of a sudden, a group of women who had not seen inside of the mosque, like I had, became Muslim women and the only ones who had the self-delegated right to talk and write about Muslim women. But it was my negative experiences with females in academia which pushed me into a different topic, and that was religious and ethnic minorities. And I'll tell you why that was significant. I was the most unlikely person to write about minorities. I was brought up in a multi-ethnic and multi-religious setting. I never saw myself as a minority, but my experiences drove me into this topic. At this point, I was more, the best word I can use, called pushte, about the modus operandi of academia. So I have developed a habit of having my work read by experts before sending it for publication. And I brought more people on board because I recognized the fault points. I cared about the byproduct. I felt it was an important issue. More input I felt would make it better. However, I had to be careful, and for a number of reasons. Number one, stealing, plagiarism, the stealing of ideas, the stealing of issues. I know some of you have had this concern and problem. Academics, I think especially older academics, can't be that creative, so they latch on. So I had to really protect the material because it was based on primary sources, also field work inside Iran. If this was daunting, there was another serious problem, and that was security. The Islamic Republic and its Iraqis in academia were very sensitive about this issue. So I kept copies of, if you remember, in those days we had diskettes, old computers. I kept one copy in my purse, one hidden in my house that only I knew, one in my aunt's Hollywood apartment, one in a safe deposit box, and one in my messy office. After the publication of the book, I felt who shared their experiences that she and her husband returned home with their children. The door was open, and there was an Iranian guy going through her papers. And when they asked him, "What are you doing here?" he pulled out a knife and came towards them. The husband threw himself in front of the children and said, "Stab me, save my children." She threw herself in front of her husband and said, "Stab me, I'm the one who writes on religious minorities." The guy with the knife got confused and didn't know who to stab, but at the same time got nervous, peed in his pants, and ran out of the house. I reduced my academic publications, I reduced my conference attendance to avoid revealing or calling attention to myself. I will save you some of my experiences in publication of the book Religious Minorities. Generally they were positive, but I will save you that part. The thing I want to talk about now is when you want to recover lost voices, you have to be on guard. First, is the community of academics ready for it? If they are not, are you ready to pay the price? I review many articles and books. I turn down most requests, but the ones that I do. I have to say from my experience, I see only two fields where you can really sound voiceless, bring the voice of the voices into it. One is history, and the other one is anthropology. The other thing I want to point out is that there is also a generational change. I don't see much of that. I see some, but not much in political science, which is my field. But I see more of it in other fields. And the presentations that I've heard also point to a generational change in that the younger generation wants to go for newer topics, for the voices, and newer ways of addressing them. The second point is, and this is very important for graduate students, can you address voiceless ones in a fair and objective fashion? Academics can easily slip into advocacy, and I don't think our role is advocacy. If you remain centered, you are getting the point across. I want to give you an example. When I was doing my second book, I knew that recognized religious minorities inside Iran would be the first to deny evidence-based scholarship about themselves. I used that knowledge to center my work and increase my objectivity, the way in which I worded and expressed it. Also, Professor Adelkhah, whom I loved and trusted 100%, would often read my publications, the ones that were about Iran. When I sent my manuscript to him, I asked him to watch for my words and expressions to make sure that they are more controlled. And it becomes very hard to be controlled when you're reading religious fundamentalist literature and it doesn't make any sense. So he found like half a dozen, which is a compliment. I thought I had more. The third point is, and this is also important, don't expect perfection. Since not much has come before your work, there will always be imperfections. And so you do your best in the hope that others can build up on it and move from there. The problem with academia is, however, we don't want to build up on what others have done with appreciation. We want to knock them down. It's not a knockdown issue. It's really building up what others have done before you. And the last point I want to make, and this is very much comes from my manuscript that I am finished with, which is about characteristics of grassroots groups. I think academics are hindered on many levels, which prevents them from access to inner recesses of the voices. Part of it, I think, is elitism, and that includes those in the left of the political spectrum. One thing I don't forget at Mesa, of course, in 1990, was this discussant, a woman, who was condemning everybody on the panel, criticizing everybody else. She's moving her hands. And she has all these golden bracelets that are duty. And I thought, that image stayed with me. And that is elitism. I want to finish my talk by a quotation from one of my favorite philosophers, Krishnamurti, who wrote in the 1950s. Many of us seem to think that by teaching every human being to read and write, we shall solve our human problems. But this idea has proved to be false. The so-called educated are not peace-loving, integrated people, and they too are responsible for the confusion and misery of the world. The right kind of education means the awakening of intelligence, the fostering of an integrated life. And only such education can create a new culture and a peaceful world. But to bring about a new kind of education, we must make a fresh start on an entirely different basis.
I have not enough words to thank my dear Firoozeh and Shekufe for your very well invitation. Really, it was something I was looking for without having the courage to make this trip. Thank you really very much. So I want to take advantage of this invitation, the kind invitation, that we have power to be next to Eliz, to our home, and with all of these nice families. I want to take advantage of this invitation and to talk about my last report as an anthropologist. That would help to find some of the answers to the question we received. And also in the Q&A session, I will try to do a question. It is during the summer of 2023, thanks to Clubhouse social network and to the confession of the former director of Evin prison, Hossein Motazali Zanjani, of in the years in 1987, 1988, that broke the silence of the mass execution of political prisoners at the end of the war against Iraq. What Ayatollah Motazali called it as a crime. A debate followed, which was still very timid. It allowed us to shed light on the responsibilities, not only of the individual, but also of the political framework itself. It also allows us to hear and make heard the voice of victims' family, their suffering, their demands, and to remedy as much as possible the irremediable damage that this silence of a few decades has produced in their life. Invited by a journalist who is currently living in Iran, Masoud Moayyedi, Motazali had listened for approximately 5 hours to a panel of experts, political leaders, personalities, opponents, parents, in order to verify certain facts. He didn't say anything new, not even regarding the number of victims, which varies from 2,000 to 8,000. Moreover, no one needed it to measure the extent of the disaster. But he made it easier to understand the climate of the time and the decision-making chaos that reigned at that time in the prison. He can feel the dramatic stories that were circulating. He insisted that he had no intention of atoning for his sins, which he considered impermissible and unforgivable, nor to cleanse or justify a regime that he no longer had any faith in. He simply feels the duty to tell the truth, that is the whole point, to tell the truth about the crimes against which he did not speak out at the time, even though he knew what was happening around him. So the necessity is to speak out the truth in itself and for oneself, so that it may be recorded before one's time. He said he was convinced that the order to carry out this execution did not come from Imam Khomeini, and that the Prime Minister at that period, Hossein Mousavi, had not been kept informed. Thus, while the clamor of the women life freedom movement resulted in society, the intervention of Mortazavi and the debates which followed confirmed that the institution of the truth is the major condition for a normal life, as Sheikh bin Hajipur beautiful son said. The subject returned to the forefront a year later during the July 2024 presidential election. Without a democracy, based without embarrassment and ambiguity, the question of responsibility of one of the candidates, Mustafa Pur Mohammadi, in the traumatic execution. Those of the summer of 1988. Former prosecutor, former Minister of Justice, he did nothing of his role. He did nothing of his role in what we call the constellation of death, in 1988. But he recalled with calm and without any embarrassment that he was then only a judge, that the responsibility for the facts fell to an entire system, to the regime. He clarified that he had not been part of the committee 13 longer, which selected the condemned, questioned them one last time, and pronounced the death sentence. He even claimed that the reason for his presence in this constellation of death was to try to moderate the ardor of the decision maker, to limit their excess and to distract them from massacring all the prisoners in the mad hope of suppressing all opposition to the new regime. These were the truths, therefore. But what about the truth? It does not exist. What happened if it is hidden behind the suppression, transformation, and composition of other truths, which may be segmentary, but which are nonetheless justified in a society that is itself segmented? It is easy to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, when it is a monologue and you are alone and responsible for your own affairs, before the court starts with judging you. But it becomes much, much more complicated, if not impossible, when we want to shed fair light, even if only on certain fragmentary aspects of post-revolutionary prison life. And moreover, how can we select this aspect, these sequences, by isolating them from the magma of revolutionary history? We are less concerned with the meaning of history, which we think we know, than with the men who made it, often without knowing it, and who in a certain way were its toys as much as the actors. An eternal problem that historians of Second World War, the German occupation of France, and the Algerian War are well off. Telling the truth is a duty and responsibility that falls on everyone's shoulder, but expressing it in the context of a tumultuous and furious period during which action prevails over consultation and revolutionary consensus over all other consideration is a more complex issue that necessitates greater responsibility. Because it comes from another logic and mobilizes other pairs than the classic opposition between truth and lie, or passive, or conspiracy, truth and crime, truth and consensus. Even if there is no other urgency than this duty of truth, if only because of the moral debt we owe to the family of not give in to the temptation of populism. Let us not reduce the truth. Let us not limit it to the level of the denunciation of a few responsible people, however tortured they have been, and especially since many of them are now resting in peace in their eternal home after having had a national funeral and worship of their God. Let us not reduce the truth either to a few vengeful execution on the day of the next revolution to ease the pain of families. In short, let us not underestimate either the depth of these wounds or the extent of the field of necessary truth in the exceptional political situation that Iran has gone through. Because the essential remain undoubtedly the lesson that we should draw from them, the teaching that remain for us to provide, even if it involves political or intellectual historians. It is of course necessary for us to shed light on what was committed, how it was committed, and why. However, what was the silence that was kept during, before, and after this? The fact is that the story unfolded less in the relative clarity of public space than in the opacity of activist thoughts on waiting and Rouhani's walls. The leaders of the Islamic Republic were able to take advantage of their own prison experience during the Shah's area alongside prisoners of the revolutionary left and Daryaee by establishing relationship with them and recruiting them. This is how the different tendencies of the left and the Daryaee compete to become denunciator agents, whether for conviction, whether because of conviction, whether out of conviction, spying, or simply survival, even of the former communists. This should not concede the courage, the self-sacrifice, the sacrifice of those undoubtedly much more numerous who resisted threat, temptation, torture, and who also want today to say that this is course. Their discourse. There is a silence there that is not easy to break, whatever our desire for truth. Just as it is not easy to talk about the absolute ostracism which each activist suspected of having spoken under torture and which sometimes forced them to commit suicide in the prison. Finally, there is the silence that the leaders impose on the place on the execution, on the sympathizers out of the integrity and indivisibility of the organization whose indisputable rights prevails. In a sense, there is a reason for a state even before it has access to power. I can hear some of your objections, if not your indignation. How can we confuse the action of the dominant and those of dominated? How can we place on the same level responsibilities and action which do not have the same weight, not the same means? But that is not my intention. I just want to remind you, in a prosaic way, that what stands in the way of the truth today is the truth itself, because it does not exist in the singular. Furthermore, and at the risk of repeating myself, the history of the Islamic Republic was largely made behind the wall of its prison, which are not factuality. 40 or 30 years later, the problem for a prisoner remains the same, to restore the truth, but behind this step there are so many silences, always the same, and also no one. Evil has undoubtedly changed a lot, and no longer has much in common with what it was, except that the cage, even golden, remains caged. I am an anthropologist for whom the observation of facts, practices, transformation is important, whether these are happy or unhappy, public or invisible, and confined to prison isolation, because they are always field of investigation, windows of opportunity, and warning signs. To ignore them is to ignore reality, that is to say, the truth. Apart from the constant rearrangement of the confinement and and living environment, the institution has become more complex. The men who worked there during the constellation of death, when there was a constant threat of torture and execution, are not present anymore. In exchange of their service and their silence, they receive advantage to go and work elsewhere on their own account. And some of them we respected the imperative of silence without ever saying it, and not for the same reason, but I won't add anything more. Giving the testimony of prisoner from this time reveals a prison without, you can imagine the effort with a social network, where prisoners were forced to observe religious practices and repent, where it was often necessary to sleep alternatively due to lack of space in the cell, or even in dormitories so cramped that they were called coffin, and that the revision free to access, where the whip cracked without restraint, where the slightest summon could end in a shutout that the other inmate had standing the next evening, where those condemned to death were forced to be married off so that they would not enter the afterlife as virgin. A prison where individuals were not given sufficient food, care, or hygiene. Today, it has renewed and rejuvenated its management, a process which seems permanent. There we meet veterans young people in the spirit of the time who were made up, undergo cosmetic surgery, studied foreign languages, worked as a family and as a couple, mother and daughter, husband and wife in different departments. However, when you think about it, a will remain a word of silence. Silence imposed by the authorities on the real reason for incarceration, on the content of the files, on the judicial investigation, on the extent of prison, and even on the executions. But also, silence of the prisoner who tried to protect their cause, their honor, that of their family, their ties, the two sides, that of the one of the oppressor and that of the oppressed, combined to make a ring of cacophony, inaudible often on purpose. We are required to remain silent, not only because of the authoritarianism of the prison institution, or out of fear, or out of respect for our fellow prisoners who have prisons that prison in ours. I did not want to be involved in these prison stories, which are both those of the oppressor and those of the oppressed. This happened in spite of me, and now I don't know how to break away from it. It was in spite of myself that I met young women who knew nothing about politics, but who frequented the world of politics and whose imprisonment allowed one faction to challenge another. It was also in spite of myself that I learned that we do not all go to prison for the same reason, that some foment immigration projects there which are not necessarily of a political nature, that others take refuge there to study far from family, concerned or to build up political or symbolic capital. It was in spite of myself that I learned that the Islamic Republic is building up a stock of prisoners must be binational or foreigners to negotiate its financial assets, its property and its diplomatic relations. It was in spite of myself that I learned that certain opposition groups, well established, maintain sufficiently cordial relations with the security service to have had access to my family album, confiscated with my computer during my arrest, and to publish it on Ahmad News, whose father was captured in 2019 and hanged in December 2020. It was always inspiring myself that I learned that the world of political prisoner was not only made up of opponents of the Islamic Republic, but also of some of its servants and supporters, or of members of its family of martyrs, children of commanders, or children of the British foreign ministry. As the beginning of the revolution, the link between prisoner and the political regime are often close. Finally, it was in spite of myself that I learned that the interrogators, failing to find political evidence against you, are taking over your private life your emotional and sexual types by damaging through your computer and your digital correspondence on your mobile phone, and thus have a formidable people to the detriment of the prisoner, who are neither the same age as me, nor have the same economic autonomy, and live in silence with the anxiety of having their personal lives exposed to the public area. The Iranian Civil War, because that is what it is, took place largely in prison, so the factional conflicts. I did not try to find out what it was because that would break the silence. Sometimes that neither the authorities of the Islamic Republic nor its opposition have allowed me to do, which has already begun to reproach me for my rights as in the past because of my work on religious freedom on the brain. In other words, silence is inherent to the prison world, and it has a structuring function. So I too will keep silent and remain in my solitude as a researcher, analyzing, watching, and respecting without having the capacity to write everything, because no one is expected to achieve the impossible. However, I will always write to whom and for whom it is right to. I owe it to you because ultimately you are the one who makes the law. The worst thing about silence is that we can know why we did it, but not always why we did it. I will never know why I was arrested, why Roland had to suffer this fate, why my friends who love Iran and some of them work to better understand it and make it now will probably never be able to return there again. I will never know if the people who were in contact with me were or will be worried. I would have liked to mention those who tirelessly supported me over these 4.5 years, but cannot do so for fear of compromising them, and therefore resolve to silence here too, for lack of being able to be exhaustive. But I dedicate my writing to them and to all of you who have stayed by my side to defend scientific freedom, the only one that allows us to break the silence, to extricate ourselves from our solitude, to emerge from our minority in the spirit of the Enlightenment, which has never been so necessary. And by the power of a word, I begin my life again. I was born to know you, to name you, freedom. Y por la magia de una palabra, comienzo de nuevo mi vida. Nací para